Tonight we travel to one of the darkest and most mysterious legends in the world of Dark Souls. Long before the fall of kingdoms, before the abyss spread across the land, there was a being whose sorrow and rage would awaken a darkness powerful enough to consume an entire civilization. Some call him the father of the abyss, others believe he was once the very first human. Tonight we slowly uncover the ancient and tragic story of Manus. So dim the lights, relax, and let the story begin. Long before the rise of kingdoms, before the golden city of Anor stood above the clouds, and long before the stories of knights and heroes spread across the fading world, the land existed in a state of quiet stillness known as the Age of Ancients. In that distant time, the world was covered in endless gray fog, stretching across the landscape like an ocean of silence that had no beginning and no end. Towering stone arches rose from the earth, supporting massive trees whose roots seemed older than the world itself. Beneath those trees stood the everlasting dragons, ancient creatures whose bodies were covered in stone scales that granted them a strange form of immortality. Nothing truly changed during that era. The dragons did not age, the land did not shift, and time itself seemed almost meaningless. The world simply existed in an endless balance of stillness. Then, deep within the heart of the world, a small flame appeared. This flame would become known as the First Flame, and with its arrival, the quiet balance of the Age of Ancients began to change. From the flame came something entirely new to the world: disparity. Where once there had only been gray stillness, the flame introduced difference. Light appeared where darkness had existed before. Heat emerged where cold once ruled the land. Life and death began separating into opposing forces that shaped the future of the world. These new concepts slowly spread outward from the first flame like ripples moving across water. Within that flame, powerful souls formed. Several beings discovered these souls and used them to reshape the fate of the world forever. One discovered the soul of sunlight and became known as Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight. Another discovered the soul of death and became the Gravelord, known as Nidal. The Witch of Azalith found a powerful soul that would later become the source of flame sorcery. Together, these figures would eventually challenge the ancient dragons and bring an end to the Age of Ancients. Yet among these powerful figures was another being whose discovery would quietly shape the future in ways that even the gods could not fully understand. This figure is known only as the Furtive Pygmy. While Gwyn and the other lords found great souls filled with radiant power, the Pygmy discovered something very different within the First Flame. Hidden among the other souls was the Dark Soul, a mysterious power that carried a strange and unique nature. Unlike the other Lord Souls, which remained whole and powerful within their bearers, the Dark Soul possessed the ability to divide itself into countless smaller fragments. Over time, these fragments became what the world would come to know as humanity. Every human carried within them a tiny piece of the Dark Soul. This quiet inheritance would eventually grow into one of the most important forces shaping the entire world of Dark Souls. Yet during the early days of the Age of Fire, very few understood the significance of the Dark Soul or the power it contained. The Age of Fire began when Gwyn and the other lords used their souls to defeat the everlasting dragons. Lightning shattered the dragon's stone scales, while powerful sorceries and ancient forces of death overwhelmed the ancient rulers of the world. With the dragons defeated, the gray fog slowly lifted, revealing a new world filled with sunlight, mountains, forests, and distant oceans. Civilizations began to appear beneath the light of the First Flame. Gwyn ruled over the great city of Anor, while humans spread across the land, forming their own kingdoms and cultures. For a time, the Age of Fire seemed like a golden era of growth and stability. Yet the Dark Soul quietly continued spreading through humanity. While Gwyn and the other lords wielded immense power drawn from the First Flame, humans carried something different within them, a connection to darkness itself. This darkness was not necessarily evil, but it was deeply tied to the nature of humanity and the eventual fading of the first flame. As the flame weakened over time, the balance between fire and darkness would slowly begin shifting. Somewhere deep within the distant past, long after the discovery of the Dark Soul, but before the events that would later destroy Oolacile, a human figure existed whose connection to that darkness would become legendary. That figure would eventually be remembered as Manus. The exact origins of Manus remain one of the greatest mysteries in the entire Dark Souls universe. Many scholars believe Manus may have once been an ancient human who lived during the early days of civilization. Others suggest he may have been something far older, possibly connected directly to the first fragments of the Dark Soul itself. Whatever the truth may be, Manus eventually became deeply connected to the power of the Abyss, a force that represents the uncontrolled expansion of darkness. Some ancient stories describe Manus as a primeval human, a being whose soul carried an especially powerful fragment of the Dark Soul. If this interpretation is true, it would mean Manus existed long before the rise of many kingdoms, perhaps even during the earliest ages of humanity. Over time, this ancient figure was buried deep beneath the earth. For reasons that remain unclear, Manus eventually came to rest beneath the land that would later become the kingdom of Oolacile. His grave remained hidden beneath the ground for ages, undisturbed and forgotten by the civilizations that rose and fell above him. Yet the power contained within Manus never truly faded. Deep underground, the darkness connected to the Dark Soul continued stirring quietly, waiting for the moment when something would awaken it once again. Centuries later, the kingdom of Oolacile would become known as a place of curiosity and knowledge. Unlike the mighty kingdom of Anor, which focused on power and divine authority, Oolacile became famous for its scholars and researchers who sought to understand the hidden mysteries of the world. These scholars believed that studying the ancient past could reveal secrets capable of improving the future. They searched for lost artifacts, ancient records, and forgotten knowledge buried beneath the earth. Eventually, their curiosity led them to discover something that should have remained hidden. Deep beneath their kingdom, they uncovered the ancient resting place of Manus. At first, the scholars believed they had discovered an important relic from the earliest days of humanity. They did not fully understand the power connected to the being buried below their land. To them, Manus appeared to be an ancient figure whose secrets might reveal hidden knowledge about the Dark Soul and the origins of mankind. Driven by curiosity, they disturbed the grave, and in doing so, they awakened something far older and far more dangerous than they could ever have imagined. The awakening of Manus would soon unleash a force that would change the fate of Oolacile forever. That force was the Abyss. Long before the kingdom of Oolacile became associated with darkness and tragedy, it existed as a quiet and remarkable civilization known for curiosity, knowledge, and peaceful study. Unlike the powerful city of Anor, which stood as a symbol of divine authority and military strength beneath the rule of Gwyn, Oolacile developed in a very different direction. Its people did not build their reputation through conquest or warfare. Instead, the kingdom became famous for its scholars, researchers, and historians who devoted their lives to studying the forgotten past of the world. The citizens of Oolacile believed that the ancient history buried beneath the earth still held secrets capable of transforming the future. Their libraries were filled with carefully preserved records, mysterious artifacts, and stories that had been passed down through countless generations. Within the walls of the kingdom, knowledge was treated as the greatest treasure a civilization could possess. The city itself reflected this culture of quiet curiosity. Elegant stone structures lined the winding streets, their architecture designed more for beauty and contemplation than for defense. Tall towers held observatories where scholars studied the movement of the stars, believing that the heavens might reveal deeper truths about the world below. Gardens filled with ancient trees and flowering plants created peaceful spaces where thinkers could gather and discuss their discoveries. The people of Oolacile lived surrounded by art, philosophy, and research, and for many years the kingdom existed in relative harmony with the rest of the world. Yet the scholars of Oolacile were not content to simply preserve knowledge from the past. They were driven by a powerful desire to uncover secrets that had been lost during the earliest ages of civilization. Many believe that somewhere beneath the earth lay fragments of forgotten history, dating back to the time when the first flame first appeared. Some researchers even speculated that buried deep below the surface might be traces of the original Dark Soul itself. The mysterious power discovered by the furtive pygmy long before the rise of human kingdoms. This fascination with ancient history eventually led the scholars of Oolacile toward a discovery that would change their kingdom forever. Beneath the quiet forests surrounding the city lay deep underground caverns, filled with remnants of civilizations far older than anything recorded in the kingdom's libraries. Explorers began traveling into these hidden chambers, bringing back fragments of stone tablets, broken weapons, and strange relics whose origins could not easily be explained. Each discovery only increased the excitement within the scholarly community. Many believed they were slowly uncovering pieces of the world's earliest history, and with each new expedition they ventured deeper beneath the earth. At first, these explorations revealed nothing more than ancient ruins and forgotten burial sites. But eventually, the scholars discovered something that appeared far more significant. Deep within one of the underground chambers, they found the remains of an enormous grave. The size of the burial site suggested that whoever had been placed there must have been a figure of great importance during the earliest ages of humanity. The discovery sparked intense debate among the scholars of Oolacile. Some believed the grave might belong to a legendary figure connected to the earliest human civilizations. Others speculated that the burial site could contain knowledge related to the Dark Soul itself. Whatever the truth might have been, curiosity quickly overcame caution. The scholars decided to investigate further. Carefully, they began examining the ancient grave, studying the surrounding symbols and relics that had remained untouched for countless years. Strange markings carved into the stone seemed to suggest that the figure buried there possessed a powerful connection to darkness. Yet, instead of treating this discovery as a warning, many researchers saw it as an opportunity. If the buried figure truly possessed knowledge about the dark soul, then awakening or studying that power might reveal secrets humanity had never before understood. What the scholars did not realize was that the grave they had discovered did not simply contain the remains of an ancient figure. It contained Manus. For ages, the being known as Manus had remained buried beneath the earth, his connection to the dark soul growing unstable within the depths of the underground chamber. Whether Manus had once been a human, a powerful leader, or something far older remained unknown even to the scholars who discovered him. But one thing was certain: the power contained within that grave had never fully faded. When the scholars began disturbing the burial site, they unknowingly awakened the darkness connected to Manus. At first, the changes within the kingdom were subtle. Strange shadows began appearing within the deeper caverns beneath the city. Some explorers reported hearing faint whispers echoing through the tunnels where the ancient grave had been discovered. Others described an uneasy feeling spreading through the underground chambers, as though something deep below the surface had begun to stir. Yet despite these warnings, the scholars continued their research. Their curiosity pushed them deeper into the underground ruins, convinced that they stood on the edge of discovering something extraordinary. Many believed they were close to unlocking knowledge that could reshape humanity's understanding of the world. But the truth was far more dangerous than any of them imagined. The awakening of Manus did not happen in a single sudden moment. Instead, the darkness connected to his soul began spreading slowly through the underground caverns like a growing shadow. The deeper the scholars traveled, the stronger that presence became. Some researchers began noticing strange changes within themselves. Their thoughts grew darker, their emotions more unstable. The whispers within the tunnels became louder, echoing through the stone corridors like distant voices calling from another world. Eventually, the corruption could no longer remain hidden beneath the surface. The darkness erupted upward from the underground chambers and began spreading across the kingdom of Oolacile itself. What had once been a peaceful land of scholars and philosophers suddenly found itself facing a force unlike anything it had encountered before. The shadows creeping across the streets were not simply darkness caused by the absence of light. They carried a strange living quality, twisting the land and the minds of those who encountered them. The people of Oolacile soon realized that something ancient had awakened beneath their kingdom. And with that awakening, the first signs of the abyss had begun to appear. At first, the awakening of Manus did not reveal itself as a violent catastrophe. The earliest signs of change within the kingdom of Oolacile were subtle enough that many citizens barely noticed them at all. The forests surrounding the city began feeling quieter than usual, as though the wildlife had slowly disappeared without explanation. Birds that once filled the skies above the towers of the city no longer circled through the morning light, and travelers who passed through the outer roads of the kingdom began describing a strange heaviness in the air. Even the wind that moved through the tall trees seemed different, carrying a faint whispering sound that few people could clearly explain. For the scholars who had disturbed the ancient grave beneath their city, these changes seemed unimportant compared to the excitement of their discovery. They believed they were standing on the edge of uncovering knowledge that had been hidden since the earliest days of humanity. Unfortunately, the force they had awakened was not knowledge waiting to be studied. It was something far older and far more dangerous. Deep beneath the ground, within the chamber where the ancient grave had been disturbed, the darkness connected to Manus slowly began expanding. The power resting within his soul had remained buried for ages, but once awakened, it did not remain contained within the grave for long. At first, the corruption spread through the underground tunnels like slow-moving shadows creeping along the walls. The scholars who continued exploring those chambers soon began noticing that the environment itself felt different. Their torches burned with unstable flames that flickered wildly even when no wind was present. Strange shapes appeared briefly at the edges of their vision before disappearing again when they tried to focus on them. Some explorers claimed to hear voices echoing through the deeper tunnels, soft murmurs that seemed to speak directly to their thoughts rather than through the air itself. These experiences unsettled many of the researchers, yet the desire to understand what they had discovered pushed them deeper into the underground ruins. As the corruption spread outward from the grave of Manus, the power of the abyss slowly began forming beneath Oolacile. Unlike ordinary darkness, the abyss was not simply the absence of light. It was a living force connected to the uncontrolled expansion of the dark soul. Where it appeared, the boundaries between the physical world and the deeper nature of humanity began to break apart. The underground chambers that once held quiet relics from ancient civilizations started transforming into strange environments where shadows moved with unnatural purpose. Stone walls warped and cracked as if they were slowly dissolving into darkness, while the ground beneath the explorers' feet sometimes shifted slightly, as though the land itself had begun to breathe. Eventually, the corruption could no longer remain hidden beneath the surface of the kingdom. The first signs of the abyss appearing above ground came in the form of strange disturbances within the forests surrounding Oolacile. Travelers who attempted to pass through those woods began reporting that the landscape itself appeared distorted. Paths that had once led safely between villages suddenly twisted in unfamiliar directions, and thick fog gathered between the trees even during clear daylight. Some people claim they saw dark figures moving silently between the trunks of the forest, watching them from a distance before vanishing into shadow. These reports spread quickly among the citizens of Oolacile, yet few understood the true cause behind these strange events. Within the city itself, the scholars who had uncovered the grave of Manus continued their work, unaware that their discovery had already begun changing the fate of their kingdom. The deeper they studied the underground ruins, the more unstable their environment became. Strange symbols carved into ancient stone tablets seemed to shift slightly when examined too closely, as though the meaning behind them was constantly changing. Some researchers began suffering from disturbing dreams in which they saw endless darkness stretching across the world like a vast ocean. Others reported hearing whispers that seemed to promise hidden knowledge if they continued digging deeper into the earth. These whispers were not simply hallucinations. They were the voice of the abyss. As the influence of Manus grew stronger, the citizens of Oolacile themselves began experiencing subtle changes. Many people found their emotions becoming more intense and unpredictable. Feelings of fear, anger, and sorrow seemed stronger than they had ever been before. Some individuals became withdrawn and distant, while others displayed sudden bursts of violent behavior that frightened those around them. The scholars studying the underground ruins noticed these changes but struggled to explain them. They believed they might be witnessing some unknown side effect of the ancient power they had uncovered. What they did not realize was that the abyss was already reaching into their minds. Over time, the corruption grew powerful enough to transform the physical world as well as the people living within it. The streets of Oolacile began showing signs of decay, even though no natural disaster had struck the city. Buildings that once stood proudly along the roads developed strange cracks along their foundations. Shadows gathered in corners where sunlight should have reached, forming dark shapes that remained long after the sun moved across the sky. The once peaceful atmosphere of the kingdom slowly transformed into something uneasy and tense, as though the entire city sensed that something terrible was approaching. Eventually, the moment arrived when the power of Manus could no longer remain contained. Deep within the underground chamber where the grave had been disturbed, the darkness erupted outward in a violent surge of energy. The ground trembled as the force of the abyss spread rapidly through the tunnels and burst upward toward the surface of the kingdom. What had once been subtle whispers and shifting shadows suddenly became a living storm of darkness, consuming everything in its path. The scholars who had awakened Manus were the first to encounter this overwhelming power, and many of them were transformed instantly into twisted creatures driven by madness and despair. Above ground, the citizens of Oolacile watched in horror as the land itself began changing before their eyes. The forests surrounding the kingdom grew darker and more distorted with each passing hour. Creatures that had once been ordinary animals began mutating into strange and hostile forms. The sky itself seemed dimmer, as though the light of the sun struggled to penetrate the spreading shadows rising from beneath the earth. The abyss had fully awakened. Within the center of that darkness stood Manus, the ancient being whose rage and sorrow had unleashed the corruption now consuming the kingdom. Whether Manus had once been human or something even older no longer mattered. The power of the dark soul within him had grown unstable after centuries of burial, transforming his awakening into a catastrophic eruption of darkness that spread across Oolacile like a living tide. The peaceful kingdom of scholars had unknowingly awakened one of the most dangerous forces in the entire world. And now the abyss was spreading beyond anyone's control. The birth of the abyss. As the darkness unleashed by Manus erupted outward from beneath the earth, the peaceful kingdom of Oolacile was transformed almost overnight into something unrecognizable. What had once been a quiet center of learning and curiosity became the birthplace of a living nightmare. The abyss spread outward from the underground chambers like a vast shadow spilling across the land. Streets that once held scholars discussing ancient history now echoed with strange and unsettling sounds as the corruption began reshaping everything it touched. The elegant stone structures that defined the city's architecture slowly began showing signs of unnatural distortion. Cracks spread along walls where no earthquake had struck, and dark stains crept across the ground like living ink seeping through the cracks of the world itself. Even the air within the city seemed heavier, carrying a sense of dread that made breathing feel slightly more difficult with each passing hour. At first, the people of Oolacile struggled to understand what was happening around them. The earliest stages of the abyss did not always appear as obvious destruction. Instead, the darkness began by twisting the emotions and thoughts of those who lived within its reach. Citizens who had once been calm and thoughtful became restless and anxious. Scholars who spent their lives studying ancient texts suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by strange visions and disturbing dreams. Many described hearing faint whispers echoing through their minds, voices that seemed to promise hidden knowledge or reveal secrets that had never been meant for human understanding. These whispers often grew stronger when people ventured near the underground caverns where the grave of Manus had been disturbed. As the influence of the abyss deepened, the physical world itself began changing more dramatically. The forests surrounding Oolacile were among the first places where the transformation became impossible to ignore. Trees that had once grown tall and healthy began twisting into unnatural shapes, their branches curling toward the ground like skeletal fingers reaching through the fog. The leaves covering those branches slowly darkened until entire sections of the forest appeared almost black beneath the fading sunlight. Animals that once moved peacefully through those woods became strangely aggressive or disappeared entirely, leaving the forest eerily silent except for the occasional distant howl of something that no longer sounded entirely natural. Inside the city, the situation became far worse. Citizens who had been exposed to the abyss for too long began changing in ways that frightened those around them. Some individuals developed strange growths of shadow across their bodies, while others seemed to lose control of their emotions entirely. Panic spread through the streets as families watched friends and neighbors transform into creatures driven by fear, anger, and madness. The corruption of the abyss did not simply destroy life. It reshaped it into distorted reflections of what it once had been. People who had spent their lives studying ancient history were now becoming part of a new and terrible chapter of that history themselves. Throughout the kingdom, the sky gradually darkened as though a storm had gathered over the entire region. Yet there were no ordinary storm clouds forming above Oolacile. Instead, the darkness rising from the abyss seemed to reach upward into the sky, dimming the sunlight and casting the entire land into an unnatural twilight. The once vibrant colors of the kingdom faded into shades of gray and black. Even the flowing rivers that passed through the countryside began appearing darker, their surfaces reflecting the spreading shadow like mirrors made from liquid night. During these terrifying days, the few remaining scholars, who had not yet been corrupted, began searching desperately for answers. Some attempted to return to the underground chambers where Manus had awakened, hoping they might find a way to contain the darkness before it consumed the entire kingdom. But the tunnels leading to the grave had already changed beyond recognition. The stone walls twisted inward as though pulled by invisible hands, and the ground beneath their feet shifted constantly as the abyss expanded deeper into the earth. Many explorers who entered those tunnels never returned, and the few who escaped spoke of impossible landscapes forming beneath the ground, places where the boundaries between reality and darkness had completely dissolved. Meanwhile, the transformation of Oolacile continued spreading across the land. The once peaceful city became a maze of ruined streets filled with creatures born from the corruption of the abyss. Some of these beings still carried faint traces of the humans they had once been, their distorted forms wandering through the darkness as though searching for something they could no longer remember. Others had changed so completely that no sign of their former lives remained. They moved through the ruined kingdom as guardians of the darkness, attacking anything that approached with uncontrollable fury. The deeper the abyss grew, the stronger the presence of Manus became at its center. Though few people ever saw him directly during those early moments, many could feel his influence spreading through the land like an enormous heartbeat pulsing beneath the surface of the world. Each pulse seemed to push the darkness farther outward, feeding the corruption that was already consuming Oolacile. What had begun as a disturbance within a single underground chamber had now become a force capable of reshaping an entire kingdom. News of the catastrophe eventually reached lands beyond the borders of Oolacile. Travelers fleeing the spreading darkness carried frightening stories of a city collapsing beneath a storm of shadows. Some described forests where the ground itself appeared alive with writhing darkness. Others spoke of monstrous figures wandering through the ruins of the city, their forms twisted by an unknown power. These rumors spread quickly through the surrounding regions, and before long, even the distant rulers of other kingdoms began hearing whispers about the strange corruption spreading across the land. Far to the north, within the radiant city of Anerlondo, these rumors eventually reached the ears of Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight. Reports describing a mysterious darkness consuming an entire kingdom were not taken lightly within the city of the gods. Gwyn had fought countless battles to establish the Age of Fire and protect the fragile balance of the world. If a new force had appeared that threatened that balance, it could not be ignored. Messengers arrived in Anerlondo carrying the most alarming reports yet. They described a spreading darkness unlike anything seen before, a power capable of corrupting both the land and the people living upon it. They spoke of shadows that seemed alive, creatures born from despair, and a terrifying presence at the center of the storm. The abyss. Gwyn understood immediately that this threat could not be allowed to spread beyond Oolacile. If the darkness continued growing unchecked, it might eventually reach other kingdoms and perhaps even challenge the stability of the Age of Fire itself. Yet confronting such a force would require a warrior capable of entering the abyss without immediately succumbing to its corruption. Among all the knights serving Gwyn, only one possessed the reputation and strength required for such a mission. That knight was Artorias the Abysswalker. Consume the fate of Oolacile, and perhaps the entire world would rest upon his willingness to walk into the deepest darkness ever unleashed. Artorias and the war against darkness. By the time the news of Oolacile's destruction reached the distant golden city of Anor, the spreading corruption of the abyss had already transformed the once peaceful kingdom into something unrecognizable. Reports carried by frightened travelers described forests that had turned black beneath a sky filled with unnatural shadows, rivers whose waters flowed dark as ink, and a city where the people themselves had been twisted into creatures driven by madness and despair. These stories were alarming enough on their own, but the deeper concern for the rulers of the Age of Fire was the nature of the darkness spreading across the land. This was not a simple plague or invasion that armies could easily confront. It was something far older and far more dangerous, a living force connected to the very soul of humanity itself. When these reports reached the ears of Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight immediately understood that the crisis demanded action. Within the shining halls of Anor, Gwyn had long ruled as the central figure, maintaining the Age of Fire. His victory over the ancient dragons had reshaped the world and allowed civilizations to grow beneath the light of the first flame. Yet even Gwyn knew that the flame's light was not eternal. The balance between fire and darkness was fragile, and any new force connected to the power of the dark soul had the potential to disrupt that balance. The rumors coming from Oolacile suggested that the abyss was not merely spreading darkness across the land, but actively reshaping the world itself. If left unchecked, it might grow strong enough to threaten the stability of the entire age Gwyn had worked so hard to preserve. Among the many warriors serving Gwyn were knights of extraordinary skill and loyalty. The armies of Anor had defended the kingdom from countless threats over the centuries, and within those ranks stood a group of legendary figures known as the Four Knights of Gwyn. These knights represented the highest level of strength and discipline within the kingdom's military forces. Among them were warriors whose names would echo through history. Dragon Slayer Ornstein, the master of lightning-fast combat. Hawkeye Goff, whose enormous arrows could strike enemies from incredible distances. And Lord's Blade Kieran, the silent assassin whose speed and precision made her one of the most feared fighters in the world. Yet even among these legendary warriors, one knight stood apart when it came to confronting the forces of darkness. That knight was Artorias the Abysswalker. Artorias had earned his title through years of battle against creatures touched by the abyss, long before the fall of Oolacile. He had traveled through distant lands where fragments of darkness had already begun appearing in isolated places across the world. These encounters had allowed him to study the strange nature of the abyss and develop techniques that helped him resist its corrupting influence. Unlike most warriors who might lose their sanity after prolonged exposure to such forces, Artorias possessed an extraordinary strength of will that allowed him to fight within darkness without immediately falling victim to it. Because of this rare ability, Gwyn chose Artorias for the dangerous mission ahead. The knight would travel to Oolacile, enter the spreading abyss, and confront the source of the corruption that had consumed the kingdom. It was a task that few warriors would willingly accept, because everyone who had heard the rumors understood that the abyss was not an enemy that could simply be defeated with ordinary weapons. Yet Artorias did not hesitate when the mission was given. As a knight sworn to protect the world beneath the age of fire, he accepted the responsibility with calm determination. Beside him stood a companion who would share in that journey, the great grey wolf Sif. Sif was far more than a loyal animal. Over years of battle and travel, the wolf had become Artorias' trusted partner, moving beside the knight with quiet intelligence and remarkable courage. Together they had fought countless enemies and protected many lands from the growing influence of darkness. Their bond was one of mutual loyalty, forged through battles that tested both their strength and their trust in one another. When Artorias began preparing for the journey to Oolacile, Sif followed him without hesitation. The journey itself was long and silent. As Artorias and Sif traveled farther from the golden light of Anor Londo, the landscape around them slowly began showing signs of the spreading corruption. Forests grew darker with each passing mile, and strange shapes appeared along the edges of the roads they traveled. Some villages they passed had already been abandoned, their inhabitants having fled after hearing rumors about the terrible events unfolding in Oolacile. Those who remained behind spoke in hushed voices about a creeping darkness that seemed to be moving across the land like an approaching storm. Eventually, the knight and his companion reached the outer borders of the corrupted kingdom. The sight that greeted them there confirmed the worst of the rumors they had heard. The once beautiful forests surrounding Oolacile had transformed into twisted landscapes where the trees themselves appeared warped by the influence of the abyss. Their branches stretched in unnatural directions, and the ground beneath them was stained with dark patches where the corruption had seeped through the soil. The air carried a heavy silence that made even the wind feel distant and uneasy. Yet Artorias continued forward. Moving carefully through the ruined forest, the knight soon began encountering the creatures that had once been citizens of the fallen kingdom. These beings no longer resembled ordinary humans. The abyss had reshaped them into distorted forms driven by uncontrollable rage and despair. Some staggered through the darkness like hollow shadows of their former selves, while others attacked with sudden bursts of violent energy the moment they sensed the presence of a living enemy. Each battle brought Artorias closer to understanding the true scale of the catastrophe that had consumed Oolacile. The abyss was not merely destroying the kingdom, It was transforming it into a living extension of the darkness itself. Every corrupted creature, every twisted tree, and every patch of shadow across the land seemed connected to the growing presence of Manus deep beneath the earth. As the night and Sif pushed deeper into the ruined kingdom, the darkness around them grew stronger. The sky above the city appeared dim even during daylight hours, as though the abyss itself was blocking the light of the sun. The once beautiful architecture of Oolacile had collapsed in many places, leaving broken towers and shattered streets that echoed with the distant sounds of corrupted creatures wandering through the ruins. Somewhere within that darkened city waited the source of it all. Deep beneath the ground, within the heart of the abyss, Manus continued unleashing the chaotic power of the dark soul. The darkness spreading from him had already consumed an entire kingdom, and if no one stopped him, it might soon spread far beyond Oolacile's borders. Artorias understood that the path ahead would lead him into the deepest part of that corruption. Yet he did not turn back. With his great sword ready and Sif walking beside him, the Abysswalker continued his advance toward the center of the darkness, toward the battle that would soon transform him into one of the most tragic legends in the entire world of Dark Souls. And somewhere deep within the shadows waiting ahead, the father of the abyss was already preparing to meet the knight who had come to challenge him. The chosen undead and the truth of Oolacile. Long after the fall of Oolacile and the tragic battle between Artorias the Abysswalker and Manus, the story of that forgotten kingdom slowly transformed into legend. Time passed across the land of Lordran as the Age of Fire began its gradual decline. Kingdoms that once stood proudly began to crumble. Ancient structures collapsed beneath centuries of weather, and many of the great events of the past faded into half-remembered myths. Among those myths was the tale of Artorias the Abysswalker, the knight who had supposedly conquered the abyss and protected the world from the terrible darkness that had consumed Oolacile. In the stories told by travelers and scholars, Artorias was remembered as a hero who had defeated the abyss itself before falling in battle. His courage and strength became symbols of honor among warriors who looked to the past for inspiration. Yet the truth of what had actually happened within the abyss remained hidden beneath the ruins of the fallen kingdom. Many years later, another figure would arrive in Lordran whose journey would slowly reveal the forgotten truth behind that legend. This figure was known simply as the Chosen Undead. Like countless others before them, the Chosen Undead began their journey as one of the cursed, humans carrying the mark of the dark sign. Those who bore this curse were destined to wander the world endlessly, losing pieces of their humanity with every passing death. Yet within this cursed fate also existed the possibility of something greater. Ancient prophecy suggested that one undead might one day gather the powerful souls of Lordran and either rekindle the fading first flame or allow the Age of Fire to end. During their long journey across Lordran, the chosen undead traveled through ruined cities, ancient forests, and forgotten catacombs filled with echoes of the past. Each place they visited carried fragments of stories connected to the long history of the world. Among these fragments was the legend of Artorias the Abysswalker, a knight whose name still carried great respect among those who studied the ancient lore of Dark Souls. Many warriors admired the tale of Artorias because it represented courage in the face of overwhelming darkness. Yet the deeper the chosen undead explored the world, the more they began discovering strange clues suggesting that the legend of Artorias might not be entirely accurate. The turning point in this discovery came through an unexpected encounter with a mysterious artifact connected to the lost kingdom of Oolacile. Through a strange distortion of time, the chosen undead was drawn backward into the past, arriving in the very kingdom that had once been consumed by the abyss. The moment of arrival was disorienting. The once legendary ruins described in ancient stories were now alive and active, though already beginning to show signs of the corruption that would soon destroy them. Within this earlier moment in history, the chosen undead encountered Princess Dusk of Oolacile, one of the last surviving members of the royal family. Dusk had been captured and imprisoned by the spreading corruption unleashed by Manus, and her rescue revealed something important about the nature of the catastrophe unfolding within the kingdom. The darkness consuming Oolacile was not simply a natural disaster or a magical accident. It was the direct result of Manus awakening beneath the earth and releasing the chaotic power of the abyss. As the chosen undead continued exploring the corrupted kingdom, the true scale of the disaster became clearer. The streets of Oolacile were filled with twisted creatures that had once been ordinary citizens. The forests surrounding the city had become distorted landscapes where the boundaries between shadow and reality seemed to blur together. Everywhere the traveler looked, there were signs that the abyss was expanding outward from a single central source deep beneath the land. Eventually, the chosen undead discovered the deepest part of the corrupted kingdom, the place where Manus himself waited. Unlike the distant legends that described Artorias defeating the abyss, the chosen undead encountered something very different. The being known as the Father of the Abyss still existed, and the darkness surrounding him remained powerful enough to threaten the entire world. Manus appeared as a massive creature formed from chaos and sorrow, his enormous arms striking with devastating force, while waves of dark energy surged outward from his body. The battlefield itself seemed alive with shadow, shifting constantly as the abyss responded to the presence of an enemy. The battle that followed was one of the most intense encounters within the entire journey of the chosen undead. Manus attacked with wild fury, his enormous strength fueled by the unstable power of the dark soul within him. The abyss responded to his movements like a storm reacting to the wind, sending bursts of darkness across the battlefield with each strike. Yet despite this overwhelming power, the chosen undead continued fighting with determination, using every skill and weapon gathered during their long journey across Lordran. After a long and exhausting struggle, the chosen undead finally succeeded in defeating Manus. With the fall of the Father of the Abyss, the chaotic darkness surrounding Oolacile began weakening. The corruption that had spread across the land did not vanish instantly, but the source feeding its growth had finally been destroyed. The terrifying storm of shadows unleashed by the awakening of Manus slowly began settling into silence. Yet even in victory, the chosen undead realized something important. The legend of Artorias had been misunderstood. The knight remembered as the conqueror of the abyss had never actually defeated Manus himself. Instead, Artorias had entered the abyss to protect the world from its spread, sacrificing his own strength and sanity in the process. His final act had been one of loyalty and courage, protecting his companion Great Grey Wolf, Sif, rather than abandoning him in the face of overwhelming darkness. The true defeat of Manus had only occurred much later, when the chosen undead arrived in the past and completed the battle that Artorias could not finish alone. This discovery transformed the meaning behind the legend of Artorias. Rather than diminishing his courage, the truth revealed something far more powerful about his character. Artorias had not failed in his mission. Instead, he had fought bravely against a force far beyond what any single warrior could defeat. His sacrifice had slowed the spread of the abyss long enough for another hero to eventually arrive and finish the battle. As the chosen undead returned to their own time, the ruins of Oolacile once again became silent reminders of the terrible events that had taken place there. The kingdom itself was gone, swallowed by centuries of decay and lingering darkness. Yet the truth behind its fall had finally been revealed. The legend of Artorias the Abysswalker would continue spreading across the world, but now there existed a deeper understanding behind the story. The knight who had once walked into the abyss had not been a conqueror of darkness. He had been its final guardian, and because of that sacrifice, the world had been given enough time for another champion to rise and confront the father of the abyss himself. The legacy of the abyss. After the fall of Manus, the violent storm of darkness that had consumed Oolacile slowly began to quiet. The abyss did not disappear entirely, but the chaotic force that had driven its expansion was finally gone. Without Manus feeding it with endless rage and sorrow, the spreading corruption weakened and settled into scattered fragments across the land. The ruined kingdom remained scarred by the catastrophe, its once elegant buildings broken and half swallowed by shadow. Yet the unstoppable expansion of darkness had finally been halted. In time, the world above would continue moving forward, though the memory of Oolacile would slowly fade into legend. For those who later traveled through Lordran and heard whispers of the ancient kingdom, the story would often sound like a distant myth rather than a historical truth. Many generations after those events, scholars attempting to understand the deeper history of the world would find fragments of the story scattered throughout ancient texts and ruins. Some writings describe the awakening of Manus as a warning about the dangers of disturbing forces connected to the dark soul. Others focused on the heroism of Artorias the Abysswalker, whose willingness to enter the abyss had slowed the spread of corruption long enough for another hero to eventually defeat its source. Yet no single record preserved the entire truth. Like so many events in the world of dark souls, the past became fragmented, existing only through scattered memories and half-forgotten legends. Over time, the name of Manus became associated with the very idea of the abyss itself. The darkness he unleashed was understood as a reflection of the unstable nature of the dark soul, the same power that existed in small fragments within every human. This realization created an unsettling thought among many scholars. If the abyss was connected to humanity's deepest nature, then the potential for darkness existed within every person who carried a fragment of that ancient soul. The fall of Oolacile therefore became more than a tragic historical event. It became a symbol of what could happen when the hidden power within humanity was awakened without restraint. Yet the story also carried another meaning. The actions of Artorias and the later victory of the chosen undead demonstrated that even in the presence of overwhelming darkness, individuals could still resist its influence. The abyss might represent chaos and despair, but it was not unstoppable. Courage, loyalty, and sacrifice could slow its spread and sometimes even overcome it entirely. This balance between darkness and resistance became one of the defining themes repeated throughout the long history of the world. As centuries passed, the land where Oolacile once stood slowly transformed into quiet ruins, hidden beneath thick forests and shifting soil. Travelers passing through the region rarely understood the true significance of the broken structures scattered across the landscape. To most people, they were simply remnants of an ancient civilization lost to time. Yet beneath the earth, the faint traces of the abyss still lingered, silent reminders of the terrible power that had once erupted there. The ground itself seemed to carry a memory of those events, as though the land had not entirely forgotten the moment when darkness had risen from beneath its surface. Some who ventured too close to those ruins reported strange sensations while walking among the broken stones. The air sometimes felt unusually cold, even on warm days, and distant whispers occasionally echoed through the trees when no wind was present. Whether these experiences were real remnants of the abyss or simply the imagination of travelers, influenced by old stories, remained impossible to prove. Yet the legends surrounding Oolacile continued spreading through the world, ensuring that the kingdom would never be completely forgotten. Meanwhile, the cycle of fire and darkness continued unfolding across the world. The age of fire that Gwyn had created long ago was slowly fading, just as it always had throughout the repeating cycles of history. Each time the first flame weakened, new heroes would rise to either rekindle its light or allow the world to drift closer toward the age of dark. Within that endless cycle, the story of Manus and the Abyss remained an important reminder of what could happen when the balance between those forces was disturbed. Imagine now the quiet forest that eventually grew above the ruins of Oolacile. Tall trees stretch toward the sky while moss covers the stones of structures that once held scholars and philosophers searching for hidden knowledge. The wind moves softly through the branches, carrying only the faintest echoes of a past that most people no longer remember. Somewhere beneath that peaceful landscape lie the remnants of the caverns where Manus was once buried and where the abyss first emerged into the world. Yet the darkness that once erupted there now sleeps silently beneath the earth. The story of Manus, Artorias, and the fall of Oolacile therefore becomes part of a larger tapestry of legends woven throughout the world of dark souls. Each story connects to the next, forming a history filled with heroes, sacrifices, and the constant struggle between light and darkness. Some of those stories are remembered clearly, while others survive only through whispers carried across centuries of fading memory. And so the tale of the Father of the Abyss slowly settles into that quiet place between history and legend. The kingdom that once awakened him has vanished, its scholars and citizens long gone. The knight who challenged the darkness became a symbol of courage remembered by generations of warriors. And the abyss itself remains as a reminder that even the smallest fragment of the dark soul can grow into something powerful enough to reshape the fate of entire civilizations. As the world continues its endless cycle, new travelers will one day walk through those quiet forests without realizing the true history beneath their feet. Yet the memory of those ancient events still lingers within the land itself, hidden beneath the trees and the earth, waiting silently as time continues moving forward. Reflection on Manus and the Abyss. As the final echoes of the story begin to fade, it can be peaceful to step back for a moment and quietly reflect on everything that has unfolded. The world of Dark Souls is filled with ruined kingdoms, fading legends, and heroes who walk through darkness in ways few others could endure. Yet among all the stories scattered across the land of Lordran, the tragedy of Manus and the fall of Oolacile remains one of the most haunting. It is not simply a tale of a powerful enemy rising from the depths of the earth. Instead, it is a reminder of how fragile the balance between light and darkness truly is, and how easily curiosity or grief can awaken forces that reshape the fate of entire civilizations. Imagine the quiet land where the kingdom of Oolacile once stood. The ruins that remain today are silent beneath the slow passage of time. Trees have grown tall where elegant buildings once stood, their roots wrapping gently around ancient stone. Moss covers the remnants of pathways that scholars once walked while discussing the secrets of the past. The wind moves softly through the forest canopy, carrying no trace of the chaos that once consumed the kingdom. Yet beneath the calm surface of the land, the memory of those events still lingers quietly within the earth. Long ago, the scholars of Oolacile believed that knowledge alone could reveal every mystery hidden within the world. Their curiosity led them deep beneath the ground in search of ancient truths connected to the dark soul. What they discovered instead was the resting place of Manus, a being whose sorrow and rage had grown unstable over centuries of burial. When they disturbed his grave, the power of the abyss erupted into the world like a storm of shadow. In a single moment, their peaceful kingdom became the center of one of the greatest catastrophes the world had ever known. Yet the story does not end only with destruction. Within the darkness unleashed by Manus, other figures rose to challenge the spreading corruption. Artorias the Abysswalker walked willingly into the abyss itself, confronting the chaos at its source, even though he knew the battle might cost him everything. His loyalty to his companion, Great Grey Wolf Sif, ensured that the wolf survived, even as the knight himself was consumed by the darkness he had sworn to fight. And many years later, another traveler, the chosen undead, would step into the past to face Manus directly, bringing an end to the violent force that had once threatened to spread across the entire world. These intertwined stories reveal something important about the nature of the Dark Souls universe. Darkness itself is not simply an enemy to be destroyed. It is a natural part of the world, connected to the very soul of humanity. Every person carries a fragment of the dark soul, a tiny echo of the ancient power first discovered by the furtive pygmy within the first flame. The abyss represents what can happen when that power grows beyond control, when sorrow, anger, or despair allow darkness to expand without balance. Yet, even within that darkness, courage continues to appear. The knight who walked into the abyss, the wolf who guarded his memory, and the traveler who returned to confront Manus all demonstrate that the presence of darkness does not erase the possibility of hope. The world of dark souls may be filled with fading fires and crumbling kingdoms, but within that fading world, there are always individuals willing to stand against the shadows. Now imagine once more the forest that has grown above the ruins of Oolacile. The evening sky slowly darkens above the tall trees, while soft light filters between the branches. Somewhere beneath the earth, the caverns where Manus once awakened remain hidden from the world above. The abyss that erupted there long ago has settled into quiet fragments scattered across distant lands. Travelers who pass through the forest may never realize the history buried beneath their feet, yet the memory of those events continues to shape the world around them. The wind moves gently through the leaves. The ruins rest silently beneath layers of moss and soil. And the story of Manus slowly drifts into the quiet place where ancient legends eventually settle. If you are listening to this story while resting, allow the world of dark souls to fade softly into the distance now. The battles have ended, the echoes of the abyss have grown quiet, and the land that once held Oolacile has returned to peaceful silence. The fires of distant kingdoms burn faintly beyond the horizon, while the forests of Lordran remain calm beneath the night sky. But even as this story comes to rest, many other legends still wait to be explored. In our next journey together, we will travel back even further into the ancient history of the world to uncover the mysterious story of the first flame itself. The moment when light first appeared within the gray fog of the Age of Ancients. We will explore how Gwyn, the witch of Izalith Meadow, and the furtive pygmy discovered the great souls that shaped the fate of the world. Their discovery would begin the Age of Fire and set into motion the endless cycle that defines the entire history of dark souls. That story begins at the very start of everything. So if you are still awake, you can simply allow the next journey to begin when it appears. And if sleep has already started to arrive, then rest peacefully while the quiet world of dark souls continues drifting softly into the night. Good night, traveler.